This video is going to be quite different to the usual ones that I do on here, but I wanted to do a quick update about my bees. They're something that I've featured quite a lot on here, and I'm really passionate about them and ethical beekeeping, but unfortunately I've had to have quite a dramatic rethink of my situation this week after I ended up having to be taken into hospital in an ambulance and spend the night in A&E. So despite the fact this video will probably have quite an attention-grabbing title, I don't actually want to be over dramatic about things, but I do think it's a good idea for me to explain what happened, how I ended up in A&E, as well as talking about the situation with my bees now and all the positives that I've taken from keeping my bees over the past couple of years. If you didn't know already, for a few years now I've had 2 hives of honeybees in the garden, just behind the converted dining space where I serve my tasting menu and that I live above. And I've loved working with the bees. They're really fascinating animals, they're so weird and cool, and it's been a real privilege to be able to serve their honey on my tasting menu. And I've got enough stored from the years of working with them that I'll be able to continue doing that for the next couple of years as well. And I never got stung by the bees all that often, but the nature of sharing your space with animals like these is that on occasion it is gonna happen, even if it's just that they get stuck in your clothing and it's an accident, and that's exactly what happened this week. The weather here was really hot, and so I had the doors to the dining space open wide late into the evening, and it's very rare that the bees would actually come into the dining space, but this time one of them must have and settled on a shirt that I had hanging down here. And then I went to put it on and the bee must have felt trapped and it just stung me on the forearm. And unfortunately, although for someone keeping bees I've only really been stung very rarely, you can develop an allergy to the bee venom that means each time you're stung you get a worse and worse reaction. Now for most people a single sting wouldn't be that worrying, but my allergic reactions had already got to the point they were pretty bad, and then this is where it crossed over into getting a bit scary. Within a couple of minutes of being stung, I started to have bumps come up on my skin that spread up my arm from where I'd been stung, and then across my chest and all the way down my other arm, as well as starting to go up the side of my neck and across my ribs. So at this point I panicked a little bit and went to tell my fiance so that she knew the situation as well. And by the time I was talking to her, I'd started to have numbness and pins and needles spreading up the side of my neck and into my ear. So we decided to call 111, which is a non-emergency medical number here in the UK. And then while I was on the phone to them, my symptoms continued to get worse. So this pins and needles sensation got more and more dramatic. It felt like having had anaesthetic at the dentist's, and then it was the point where my lips were starting to swell that the operator said they were going to call an ambulance. And that's because this is the stage where if that reaction continued, your throat could start to close up, it could become difficult to breathe, or you could go into anaphylactic shock. Luckily, by the time the ambulance got here, my symptoms hadn't got any better, but they seemed to have slowed down and they weren't getting any worse. So the ambulance crew were still concerned that they wanted me to be monitored, and they took us into the A&E, which is where I spent the night. So obviously that was all a bit scary and awkward, and then concerning that each time I've had a reaction it's got worse, so it starts to make you think what would happen the next time, or if I got stung by more than one bee, or on the neck or the face. And then another fun fact, if you've never had this type of allergy, is that you can have a secondary reaction, which is also what happened to me. About 24 hours after being stung, I started to get this pins and needles sensation come back in my neck and my ear, and then my vision went blurry and my heart rate went up to about the same as it is when I'm in the middle of a workout at the gym. And so I had to repack a bag, ready to go back to the hospital if I needed to, and sit there and carefully monitor my symptoms with my fiance. And luckily we were able to ride that out, and now I have an EpiPen and I've got appointments with allergy specialists. But the whole thing made me realise that really working with the bees had probably got to the point that it was quite dangerous for me. All of that too is ignoring what happened to the actual arm I was stung on, which swelled up to about double its size, right from where I was stung on the forearm, up past my elbow and my shoulder and into my neck. And that is, really unpleasant, but it was the sudden onset of those anaphylaxis symptoms were the thing that were really scary, both for me and my fiance. So before I tell you about where we're up to with the bees now, I just want to say how amazing all the medical staff that I dealt with were. And I don't want to be over dramatic about what happened to me. It was scary and it was a wake-up call, but what was incredible was how quickly the ambulance was here. Once they took us into A&E, how quickly I was seen, and this being the UK, all of that emergency treatment and all the subsequent allergy specialist appointments that I'll have is all free and organised through the NHS, which is just such an incredible institution and something I'm so grateful that we have here. But unfortunately and sadly, we've had to take the difficult decision now to rehome the bees, because if this circumstance had been different, or if I'd been stung multiple times, this could really easily have been an even more dangerous situation. I do hope that one day in the future I might be able to have bees again. Maybe if in the future I had a space that meant they could be positioned a little bit further away from where I'm living and working. And I'm also going to look into some immunotherapy treatments to see if I can reduce the severity of this allergic reaction too. And I'm gutted that the bees won't be living here anymore, because they're so cool and so fascinating, and they really don't want to sting you. This sting that came about was a total accident, and it's just the nature of sharing our space with them. So the bees have now been rehomed to a kind local beekeeper who's going to look after them and give me updates about them, and also said he'd bring us some of their honey towards the end of the season. And I wouldn't want hearing about this experience to put anyone off, because keeping bees is one of the best things that I've ever done. I've learnt so much from it. My respect and understanding of how pollinators work is so much better. It really felt like it helped me to be more in touch with seasonality and nature. And like I say, my fiance has almost no reaction to the occasional sting at all. So if you're thinking about keeping bees, absolutely I would highly recommend that you do it. And just obviously keep an eye on if you start to have increasingly bad reactions to them, and maybe get a grip on that a bit earlier than I did. So I'm sorry to have to make this video and explain what's happened and why the bees will no longer be staying here, but because I've featured them on the channel and because my guests are used to seeing the beehives here in the garden whilst they're dining, I wanted to take a moment and explain what had happened and why we'd had to make this quite difficult decision. And the bees were so prolific that even though we only ever took excess honey from them when it was more than what they could use, the fact that I'm only cooking for 8 guests a night here means that I've actually got quite a lot of honey stored from the past couple of years, and certainly enough to see me through another couple of years into the future. So I'll still be able to serve their honey and talk about what made working with the bees so exciting and thrilling to me, even though unfortunately they're not going to be staying here now. And the last positive notes that I'd like to finish on, I think, are to say, if you eat honey, to get it from small-scale local producers. Don't get it from supermarkets. Get it from people that are working on a small scale, really love what they do, really care for their bees. That's something really positive that you can do, as well as planting for pollinators and trying to support wild pollinators and bees as well. If you're thinking about keeping bees, I would really highly recommend it. It's honestly been such a joy. And one of the things we might think about here now is whether we should use some of that time and space to do something else, like perhaps keep rescue chickens. So I don't know, watch this space, maybe there'll be an update on stuff like that in the future. So thanks very much for watching and sticking with me, and I hope that there are positives to be taken from this video too. And then in the next one I'll be back to my more usual recipe and technique videos, so until then, look after yourselves and I'll see you soon.